1999, a cultural point where old worlds collided with new dreams. The upcoming turn of the millennium carried a strange, exciting promise. The future was bright, the times were thrilling, entertainment was still experimental, and in this era, the art form of animation began to change. What emerged was beyond entertainment. What emerged was a revolution. 1999 spawned a creative rupture that challenged what animation could be, who it was for, and what it could say. It was the moment the medium started speaking to everyone. This is how 1999 changed animation forever. Building up to this year, two creators had unique experiences that would lead them to each create something bigger than they'd ever dreamed imaginable. Before the world knew his name, Steven Hillenburg was teaching marine biology in California. But even as he taught kids about science, his love for art and animation never faded. He had studied experimental animation at Cal Arts in the early 90s, creating surreal, ocean-themed short films loaded with scientific wonder and absurd humor. Even before he studied animation, he created a comic called The Intertidal Zone to help students learn about sea creatures. It was this comic that planted the earliest seeds of what would eventually become a cultural phenomenon. By the mid-90s, Hillenburg made a leap into professional animation, working as a writer and director on Rocko's Modern Life. There, he honed his craft, learning how to make chaos feel sincere. When Rocko's Modern Life ended, he pitched his own show about undersea life. What he created? SpongeBob SquarePants. Meanwhile, Seth MacFarlane was a young recent graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, where he studied animation. For his senior thesis, he created a short film called The Life of Larry, which featured a middle-aged man and his cynical talking dog. It was raw and sarcastic. Fox executives liked what they saw in MacFarlane's work and asked him to develop a pilot. With little industry experience and a tight budget, MacFarlane wrote, storyboarded, and voiced the pilot almost entirely on his own. The result was edgy, fast-paced, and unlike anything on television. At an age where most people are still trying to figure out their first job, MacFarlane was preparing to launch a primetime animated series at an incredibly young age. What he created? Family Guy. Both Hillenburg and MacFarlane had unique backgrounds for creators. They didn't come up through the traditional animation pipeline and career path. They brought in outside perspectives. Both creators doubled down on strange and risky ideas, standing up for what they wanted to create, and standing up against what the networks told them they should create. As a result, these two men single-handedly reshaped mainstream animation in just the next few years. Premiering just months apart, Family Guy and SpongeBob SquarePants were making waves. Their first 3 seasons, which are each considered the golden era for the shows, set the tone for the next 2 decades of animated television. Practically every animated show that followed them either borrowed from its blueprints or reacted in response to them. SpongeBob revived Nickelodeon's animation block. It injected it with extreme surrealism. It has been described as the 21st century Looney Tunes. Its early seasons blended slapstick with a uniquely modern sensibility. It was not cynical. It was not ironic. It was earnest and bizarre. SpongeBob's unrelenting optimism, paired with Squidward's deadpan adult fatigue, created a dynamic that was equal parts sweet and absurd. This dynamic was the secret formula. It was iconic. And while it was a children's show, it never talked down to its audience. The humor was layered, goofy for kids, but deeply weird and referential for older viewers.
Firmly grasp it! Firmly grasp it!
This made it one of the first 4-quadrant cartoons, paving the way for other shows like Adventure Time, Regular Show, and The Amazing World of Gumball to walk the line between childish imagination and adult strangeness. The characters in SpongeBob were deeply emotional beings. SpongeBob himself wasn't just happy-go-lucky. He experienced existential dread, heartbreak, disappointment, awe, anxiety, and crushing failure. Squidward embodied burnout and creative stagnation. Patrick showed vulnerability through stupidity. Mr. Krabs was greedy but also sentimental. Even Plankton had moments of self-doubt and longing. The emotional flexibility gave the show depth. It could shift from slapstick to melancholy without feeling disjointed. Episodes hit emotional notes that stuck with viewers well into adulthood. The show taught that emotions mattered, even exaggerated cartoon emotions. Unlike most cartoons at the time, which focused on kids, teenagers, or school settings, SpongeBob centered on working adults. He had a job, he had a budget, he had a demanding boss, annoying neighbors, and dreams of getting his license. The characters lived independently, navigated careers, and dealt with the mundane activities of adulthood. By showing adults in absurd yet relatable roles, SpongeBob became weirdly aspirational. It made the mundane magical and gave kids a fun glimpse into adult life, where your job, your dreams, and your friendships could still be filled with joy, chaos, and meaning. While SpongeBob thrived on innocence, Family Guy exploded with sarcasm. Its first 3 seasons pulled no punches. It was brash, offensive, referential, and downright unhinged. It was not the first of its kind, but it paved its own way.
Peter!
We act like we didn't take a lot from The Simpsons. We took a lot from The Simpsons.
As the golden era of The Simpsons was ending, Family Guy took its skeleton and ran it through a meat grinder of pop culture. It helped normalize the idea that adult animation could be mean, chaotic, and unfiltered. Family Guy was something else entirely. Absurd and nihilistic, unconcerned with morals or continuity. It shifted the landscape so far that even shows that didn't follow its formula, like BoJack Horseman or Rick and Morty, felt like they were standing in its shadow, either embracing its edge or deliberately steering away from it.
That's not your normal time pad. Where'd you get that?
I borrowed it from Rick and Morty. They borrowed plenty from us.
More than any other element, Family Guy's use of cutaway gags redefined the structure of animated comedy. A character would say something like, "That's worse than the time I..." and suddenly the show would jump to a completely unrelated, absurd scene. These moments ignored story continuity, emotional tone, and logic. It was a punchline with no setup other than the transition. And somehow, it worked. These rapid-fire tangents allowed for referencing anything, from pop culture, politics, or history. It allowed for completely absurdist jokes with no narrative consequence. This is a major reason Family Guy is not the most admired show in many animation communities. It does not have the strongest storytelling abilities, as it would eventually go on to arguably rely too much on these cutaway gags. However, the show knows it does not take itself too seriously. Love it or hate it, Family Guy became one of the most influential shows of all time. The cutaway format became a signature, spawning imitators across TV, sketch comedy, and even YouTube-style humor. Family Guy basically gave us the animated version of flipping between channels and hearing a new punchline every 10 seconds. SpongeBob SquarePants and Family Guy seem like opposites on the surface, but they shared critical similarities that redefined modern animation. Their combined influence comes from how they pushed boundaries together with overlapping tactics. They toyed with meta-jokes and non-sequiturs, training audiences to expect humor that did not always fit the story. They prioritized gags per minute, often sacrificing plot cohesion for comedic payoff. This trained a new generation of writers and viewers to value rhythmic, punchy, meme-like humor. Both shows had characters that exaggerated personality to the point of caricature. Both became instant cultural touchstones, generating viral moments before viral was as used as it is today. They proved animated shows could be pop culture drivers, not just passive entertainment. They pioneered memeable humor before internet memes were a thing. Freeze frame expressions, weird weird reaction faces, and surreal transitions turned SpongeBob into a visual lexicon for an entire generation online. Cutaway gags from Family Guy became viral videos. The 2010s renaissance of animated content, from Regular Show, Rick and Morty, Bob's Burgers, and Adventure Time, all reflect some blend of both SpongeBob and Family Guy. In the 2020s, Smiling Friends is pretty much what you'd get if you bred these two shows together. Even The Simpsons evolved in response to these shows. Together, SpongeBob and Family Guy made animation a frontline force in comedy, storytelling, and pop culture. They taught networks that animated shows could compete with live action, generate merchandise and memes, and push the medium's boundaries while still dominating ratings. Their 1999 debut marked the start of the modern animation era. It seems everything since has been in conversation to what they had started. In the 2000s, I grew up watching both of these shows. When I revisit the golden era seasons of each of them, I pick up on new jokes I did not pick up on in childhood. It was strange that the older I got, the funnier SpongeBob became, and the less funny Family Guy became. Understandably, each show gained a massive audience outside of its intended demographic. SpongeBob was a show marketed towards children but appealed to adults. Family Guy was a show marketed towards adults but appealed to children. People of all ages were seeking something that pushed boundaries in some kind of way. By attracting audiences outside of their target groups, these two shows dismantled the inaccurate long-standing assumption that animation must be for a certain age demographic.
Hey, SpongeBob.
Now, of course, we have to mention the highest quality cartoon that came out this year, Futurama. This show presented ideas and concepts in a way television shows had not really presented before. While it had been mostly consistent in quality throughout its run, many believe it had a certain golden era during its initial run on Fox. While Futurama was undoubtedly influential, it's fair to say that SpongeBob and Family Guy may have had a more direct and widespread cultural influence. However, Futurama must be mentioned because it shares a key trait. At the center of each show is a protagonist who straddles the line between adulthood and arrested development. SpongeBob is a grown adult with a full-time job, but lives with the wonder and imagination of a child. Peter Griffin is a father and a husband, but he's reckless, impulsive, and immature. Philip J. Fry is technically a man in his 20s, but emotionally stuck in adolescence. For him, it's impossible to fully escape the past. These characters represent a growing cultural fascination at the end of the 20th century. The man-child, a figure who rejects traditional adulthood or fumbles through it, often with chaos and innocence. In a time when young adults were increasingly unsure about their future roles in society, these characters presented that uncertainty and made it funny and absurd. Beyond Nickelodeon and Fox, Cartoon Network also launched a wave of original programming that would define its golden age and shape the tone of animated television for years to come. Its most iconic shows shared thematic elements that connected them to the broader cultural shift of the time. 1999 saw the launch of Ed, Edd n Eddy, which would go on to be the longest-running original Cartoon Network series of the time. In Ed, Edd n Eddy, we never see adults. The kids are autonomous, scamming, building, feuding, and surviving in a neighborhood that feels like its own society. It's Lord of the Flies taking place in a cul-de-sac, where childhood is complex and strategic. This reflected a shift in how creators view childhood, as a time of agency, creativity, and chaos. These characters behave with wild emotional swings, surreal reactions, and exaggerated desires, hallmarks of the man-child archetype. Across these shows, you see individuals adopting adult roles. There's a recurring tension between wanting to be in control and being completely unprepared for it. This mirrors the man-child theme seen across the year's most influential cartoons. Characters characters stuck between wanting to be grown up and failing to act like it. The emotional and comedic payoff is always the same. Chaos meets vulnerability. 1999 was a turning point. It marked the moment when cartoons stopped asking who they were for and started asking what they could say. The characters we met that year were emotionally stunted and morally confused, but also strangely familiar. These shows blurred the lines. They reflected a cultural shift where growing up did not mean growing out of animation. In a space between innocence and irreverence, something new was born. A generation that saw itself in imperfect, emotionally chaotic freaks. And animation has never been the same since.